Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Dr. Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new TEAM therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. His latest book, Feeling Great, contains powerful new techniques that make rapid recovery possible for many people struggling with depression and anxiety. Dr. Burns is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, David, and welcome to all of our listeners across the state, the country, throughout the world and galaxy. This is the Feeling Good podcast, and we are at episode 463. David, do you want to explain what this podcast is?
Oh, yes. I sure do. Absolutely. And here's how I'm going to explain it. This is part 2 of our Perfectionism podcast. This was a 2-hour webinar that Jill Levitt and I gave. And last week we talked about in part 1, the emotional consequences of perfectionism and what is perfectionism and what are the attitudes associated with it, and also the motivational piece, because perfectionism is hard to get rid of because we want to be perfectionistic. We think something great's going to happen. And so we talked about positive reframing and the cost-benefit analysis and more. And now in part 2, we're going to talk about some powerful methods for dealing with perfectionism, including identify the distortions, explain the distortions, the externalization of voices with, of course, the acceptance paradox, the counterattack technique, and the self-defense paradigm, and also the feared fantasy, self-disclosure, relapse prevention, and I think we even did the experimental technique using the pleasure predicting sheet with one of my former patients who was extremely perfectionistic. So we hope you'll learn a lot. This webinar has been for patients and therapists alike. There very few of us escape from the pain of perfectionism and beating up on ourselves, and we really hope that these two part 1 and part 2 are helpful to you and interesting. And once again, let us know if you like this, because the webinars that we're doing now are free. They're 2-hour webinars, 1 a month. And then we're going to publish them on YouTube. And then we're also thinking we'll publish them like this one is 2 consecutive podcasts. But since you have other ways to get these, the video, you might prefer us not to use podcasts this way, but to focus on other interesting topics. And we've got plenty of topics for podcasts, so let us know your preferences. And thank you all for being with us today. We love you all and hope you enjoy part 2 of the webinar. And thank you once again, Rhonda, for joining us. I know that you just came down for COVID, and like a trooper, you came to be with us long enough to get these introductions started and recorded on the Riverside system, and you're certainly giving way above and beyond the call of duty, and we really appreciate you, Rhonda.
I appreciate you and all of the listeners for joining in and learning with us.
We're going to move on now and leave agenda setting or assessment of resistance, as we say, and actually share with you a whole bunch of methods right now for addressing perfectionism. So we'll start with identify and explain the distortions. We're going to show you a video of Amy doing externalization of voices. We'll do a demo of the feared fantasy, and we'll share with you some anecdotal stories about the self-disclosure technique and the experimental technique, and get through all of that and some questions in the next hour. So, David, you want to talk briefly about identify and explain the distortions?
Yes, identifying the distortions has been around since I wrote Feeling Good, but I never thought of it as being very helpful to people, just a fun thing to do to get the door open a little bit, but nothing major. And I would say in the last five or 10 years, I've developed the technique called explain the distortions. And that's where identify the distortions becomes a powerhouse healing technique, and more than just a game at seeing why a thought is distorted. And the way you do it is you ask the patient, say, I'm failing my patience, and you ask them to identify the distortions in that thought. Well, Amy found 8 or 9 of the distortions in that thought alone. And then you take one of them, let's say you say this is all or nothing thinking, and you ask 3 questions of the patient. The first question is, why in general is all or nothing thinking considered distorted thinking? Why does it not map on to reality? And the answer to that is because pretty much nothing in the universe is all one way or the other way. Everything is shades of gray. Today's presentation is unlikely to be the greatest presentation in the history of the human race. That would be 100, but it's also not going to be 0. David might have irritated a few people with his somewhat challenging comments, but a lot of people might appreciate a little controversy, and a lot of people might have learned a lot and loved this presentation. So it's somewhere in between. And then the next question for Amy would be, why is, when you say I'm failing with my patients, why is the all or nothing thinking in that thought a gross distortion of reality? And the answer to that comes fairly readily. Well, because I'm doing great with nearly all of my patients. And to say I'm failing my patients is a great distortion. Sounds like all of my patients are dying and committing suicide or something, and nothing could be further from the truth. And that's the second question. And then the third question you ask and explain the distortions is, why is that unfair to you, Amy, to use that distortion? And then the answer to that might be because it's cruel to beat myself up like this because I've got 2 patients who are stuck. I would never beat up a colleague I loved and say that kind of thing to someone who was stuck with 2 patients, that type of thing. And that's called explain the distortions. And often you'll come up with a good positive thought just from that procedure, particularly if you've done the assessment of resistance effectively, and the patient has seen the beauty in their negative thoughts and feelings, and that makes it paradoxically much easier to blow away these distorted thoughts. And this is just one technique, of course, and you can also see each distortion is a different lens through which, or a window that you're looking at why the thought is screwed up. And so overgeneralization would be another way to do it. You're overgeneralizing from 2 patients to all of my patients and all of my career, and telling myself I need a new career, you see. So that's a gross overgeneralization. And that leads to another series of explain the distortions. It's another way to come up with powerful, positive thought. And the purpose is that, you see, it's the patient's belief in the negative thoughts that creates the pain. And the positive thought has to have 2 characteristics to help the patient. First of all, it has to be 100% true. Half-truths and rationalizations are just a lot of BS, and positive affirmation are worthless for the most part. But you need true positive thoughts that directly confront the negative thought. I'm failing my patients. And if the positive thought is 100% true, then the second criterion for an effective positive thought is it radically lowers the patient's belief in the thought, I'm failing my patients. I think her belief in that was 80 or 90%. And the moment the patient stops believing the thoughts, in that very moment, the patient's feelings will change. Back to you, Jill.
Yeah, no, that was beautifully explained. And so what's so cool about doing explain the distortions is it goes from being just this little cerebral exercise where you circle the distortions to really getting the patient in explaining why all or nothing is a cognitive distortion, and then why their thought is an example of it, and why that thought is unreasonable or unfair or hurtful. You already get your patient starting to generate those positive thoughts, right? And so it becomes a highly kind of interactive method. And so let's just share with you guys that in that one thought I'm feeling my patients, Amy was able to identify 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of the cognitive distortions. And then in talking back, in basically explaining these distortions, Amy was able to generate this positive thought. In fact, I'm doing well with nearly all of my patients, but it's impossible to be perfect. And I'll always fail some of my patients, and that will always give me opportunities to get consultations when I'm stuck so that I can learn and grow. And that was a belief that she said she believed 100%, which then made that original negative thought go to zero. So that's what David was talking about, that it has to be a total truth, that new positive thought, totally believable. And it also has to bring that original negative thought to zero or close to zero. And so let's move on from that. There's so much work we can do with identify and explain the distortions, but we're going to share with you one of the most powerful techniques I think you've developed, David, that is called externalization of voices. And I'll let you want to say a little bit about it, and then maybe I can walk through the steps of it.
Well, sure. It's probably the most powerful CBT technique ever developed. It was the first technique I developed when I started going to Beck's weekly seminars, and I was trying to learn CBT for the first time. And I developed it because some of the techniques, they were all interesting, but some of them felt a bit dry and intellectual, like examine the evidence and the experimental technique. And I wanted something that would hit people at the gut level. And I had done a lot of psychodrama in medical school, and that appealed to me, but it was unregulated and almost too powerful at times. And so I was trying to take the power of psychodrama and put it into a beautiful, safe method, and that became the externalization of voices. And you can model a lot of ways to crush a negative thought with externalization of voices. And especially you can model the acceptance paradox. And acceptance, when the patient really gets it, if they get it, is the same as what the Buddha called enlightenment. And so often a few minutes with the externalization of voices can accomplish what should be accomplished maybe with years or decades of meditation. It's not only a healing technique, but it's a spiritual technique. And the way it works is you tell the patient, I'm going to become the negative you. And you're going to be the positive you. We'll be the same person. We have the same name. You're Amy and I'm Amy. And I'm going to talk to you in the second person, you. So instead of I'm failing my patients, I might say to you, Amy, you're failing your patients. And then Amy has to take the positive role and try to defeat this negative voice. And it's a very powerful and intimidating technique with tremendous healing power. And when you do it, you only attack the patient with their exact negative thoughts. You don't just make up mean things to say to somebody. That's not externalization of voices. But she was telling herself, I'm a fraud and a failure, so that's one I would want to attack her with in the externalization of voices. Now, when she defends herself, she has the choice of 3 strategies. One is called self-defense. And that explain the distortions. You argue that the negative thought is distorted and it's not really consistent with the facts. And that's extremely powerful. And many people think that's all that cognitive therapy amounts to. And they're really wrong in that belief. But it's certainly a tool, but if it's your only tool, you're not going to get very far. Self-defense is weaving in at the same time, accepting a part of the negative thought, finding the truth in it with a sense of peace or even humor. So if the negative thought is, Amy, you're failing your patients, you can say, it's heartbreaking to me that I have two people who I love and care about as patients who are stuck. And I'm definitely going to get some consultations and see if there's some way I can get them unstuck. But the idea that I'm failing my patients is just grossly unfair and grossly untrue. In fact, I'm doing beautiful work with nearly all of my patients, and even the two who I'm failing with give me perfect ratings on empathy every session, and they always tell me how much it means to them to be coming to the therapy. And then the third one is called the counterattack technique. And and this is the newest dimension of the externalization of voices, and an extraordinarily valuable dimension. And you point out to the negative self that's attacking you, and you say, my real problem, friend, is not that I'm failing two of my patients. Not at all. I have another problem far greater than that, and that's listening to your constant BS, beating up on me and telling me that I'm not good enough. That's the whole key to my problem. And so this is really of a radical implementation in a dramatic format of the basic key of cognitive therapy. It's not the circumstances of our life, but these distorted thoughts that cause our suffering. It's not that Amy has two patients she's stuck with. That has no negative effect on her at all. In fact, it could even be a source of joy, because it can tell her, hey, it's time to talk to some experts and learn some new techniques. But her despair results from her interpretation of that I'm a fraud, I'm a failure, I need a new career. Those thoughts are devastating.
And so in externalization of voices, the therapist is going to play the role of, let's say, negative Amy, and the patient is going to play the role of positive Amy if we're going to hit the patient with our negative thoughts. And these are three options the patient has for how to respond to the negative thoughts. And oftentimes a combination of those three is what's needed. And so if the patient is responding with purely self-defense, only kind of justifying themselves, and they're not winning huge, then the therapist could suggest maybe adding some self-acceptance, or the therapist could even model adding some self-acceptance. If the patient is mostly accepting it, you're right, I really am so far from perfect and I make mistakes all the time, but without any kind of self-defense or, suggesting that some of that is distorted or untrue, you can add some self-defense to the response to strengthen it. And sometimes patients, we say here, need a little more spice, a little oomph, and that is what the counterattack can be really helpful for. And so these are all just different ways of responding within the role play. So we start out externalization of voices by making sure the patient understands we're not just hurling insults at them. We're asking, what role am I in and what role are you in? So we can start by just saying, what's my name? And in this case, the patient would say, you're negative Amy, right? Right. And what's your name? And Amy would say, I'm positive Amy. And we need to make sure we both have the same name. And again, that's to avoid Amy or my patient from thinking that I, therapist, am just being insulting to them, right? And then we'll do one exchange. So I would hit Amy with that negative thought, you're a fraud and a failure. And then Amy would respond, using any of these strategies that we've just talked about. And then we'll kind of pause. We don't just keep going back and forth and say, great, Amy, who won that exchange? Was that kind of me, negative Amy, or you, positive Amy? And then let's say she says, I won. I would say, well, is it small or big? And she can answer. And if she says big, I can say big or huge. The goal is that we're trying to get the patient to huge. We're not trying to eke out a little win. We're trying to get the patient completely crush or annihilate that negative thought. And quite often the patient will start with maybe a big or a small win. And we can ask them if they want to try it out again or if they want to do a role reversal. And that's where we, as the therapist, change roles, and the patient can then be negative Amy and I can be positive Amy, and model for Amy maybe some piece of the response that was missing. And the point is, we'll keep doing role reversals back and forth until Amy or the patient gets to huge, right? It's not that I, the therapist, have to be really good at my cognitive therapy tools. It's that ultimately my patient has to internalize whatever it is that's been super helpful so that my patient can really crush the negative thoughts. And so we have a video here of Amy and us doing externalization of voices. So should we go ahead and play the video, David?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, let's see what we're going to see.
Let's just see if there's any weak spots for you right now, Amy. Would you be willing to do that? And Jill and David will be tag team, and we'll be the negative Amy and attack you with some of this stuff and see if you can defeat us.
That sounds good. Yeah.
You know, Amy, you're stuck with a couple of your patients, I've heard through the grapevine. Of course, I'm the negative Amy. I'm you talking to you. But I just want to know that you should have figured this out by yourself already without having to get consultation or help.
It would have been great if I'd figured that out by myself, but it's actually a wonderful thing that I can seek out some assistance from other people, and that I'm not actually all alone in having to figure everything out. I love that it's actually an opportunity to connect with my colleagues and learn new things. And so, yeah, you know what? It's just totally not helpful when you tell me I should have already figured it out. So bug off. I'm going to go seek some help.
Okay, who won?
I won that.
Big or small?
I felt like that was huge.
Huge. Awesome. Your turn, Jill.
Yeah, but Amy, you should be able to help every patient all the time.
Again, it would be wonderful if I could instantly help every patient every time. But you know what? My problem isn't actually that I'm not able to help every patient every time. That can be, again, dealt with by seeking help. The problem is that I've been listening to you, and that's when I get really stuck. So, yeah, again, bug off.
And who won that? You or me?
I won that.
Was that big or small?
That was huge. That was huge
too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. My
Back
turn,
to you,
Amy. Yeah, sure. I'm the negative Amy again, and I just want to point out that this is a foolish thing, making this video, because your patients will see this and they'll say, I don't want to work with her. I want to find a competent psychiatrist to work with.
Let me think about that one. First, let me just say, once again, this input that you're giving me is just not helpful. So once again, bug off. I'm actually having fun doing this video. And if some patients decide they don't want to see me, that's fine. I actually feel bad when I have to turn people away because I'm too busy. And so, yeah, not helpful input. Yeah.
Okay, so who won?
I won that.
Big or small?
I think it came around to huge. I felt a little stuck initially, but yeah.
Let's just see if there's any weak.
Sorry, let me just progress to the next slide so it doesn't start over. Okay. David, did you want to make any comments before we talk about feared fantasy?
Well, I thought that was beautiful. And one thing you're looking for when you're doing externalization of voices is the body language and as well as the words. And you can see in that video, we had done quite a bit of work with her by the time we shot that video, and she was pretty much knocking it out of the park. She was not perturbed. And that's a huge change that we're looking for. And that's not only you can think as complete recovery, whatever that means, but also some enlightenment mixed in. Now, one can push it even to a higher level, if you like, and the feared fantasy is another very powerful technique I created that's designed to help patients confront their worst fears when they can't confront it in reality. You can create a fantasy for them to confront their worst fears. And often people with perfectionism, and including Amy, are having perceived perfectionism, and that's the idea that others won't love me or accept me if I'm flawed or if I make mistakes or if I'm not perfect. And when you do the feared fantasy, you explain to the patient. Someone asked about teaching the 3 strategies to the patient on externalization of voices. And yes, we do teach while we're doing therapy. There's a learning process as well as the therapeutic process. But in feared fantasy, you invite the patient to enter an Alice in Wonderland nightmare world where their worst fears are actually going to come true. So, for example, if they're afraid of disapproval, they're going to go into a world where suddenly everyone is disapproving of them. But in addition, not only do people have all these negative thoughts about you that you're afraid they're going to have, they get right up in your face and they say them to you. And this allows you to face the thing you've feared the most, often since you were a child. And when you do it, you suddenly discover that the monster has no teeth. And you can read more about this on page 10 of your handout, but we'll demonstrate it now.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that whereas the externalization of voices, I think, is really helpful for essentially all kinds of negative thoughts, the feared fantasy is especially helpful for worries about other people judging you, right? So this is going to be a really good method if you have patients with perfectionism or social anxiety or other kinds of things where they're really worried about negative evaluation from the outside. And the feared fantasy, not only can we use this for perfectionism and social anxiety, but for really any kind of self-defeating belief. That's a self-esteem equation. So I must be perfect in order to be worthwhile, or I must be perfect in order for others to love me. And essentially the roles then in the feared fantasy is that the therapist is going to play the role of someone who enacts that self-defeating belief. So in this case, David is going to be the therapist, and he's going to play the role of someone who's totally perfect and has achieved a tremendous amount, and also who looks down on people who aren't perfect, right? Because that's part of that belief system. And I'll play the role of the patient in the role play. And so David will be that over the top, really highly perfectionistic and judgmental other, and I'll play myself in the role play. And I'll be trying to defeat that kind of feared fantasy monster that David will be playing. And, like externalization of voices, there's a variety of ways that we can respond in kind of the patient role. And in essence, my role as the patient is not to defend against some actual person in reality, because if someone were really being a jerk to me, I might actually just think the best move would be to walk away, right? But my role, my goal in this feared fantasy is really to blow a hole in the idea that this is true, right? That people are more or less worthwhile when they're perfect or not perfect. So my role in the patient role is to be commenting in ways that are pointing out the illogic of this over-the-top kind of belief system. I can use things like inquiry and stroking and disarming. These are the 5 secrets of effective communication that we teach in other kinds of trainings, or the acceptance paradox. I can accept some truth in what this kind of mean perfectionistic person is saying to me. And then similar to externalization of voices, after each exchange, David, the therapist, can ask me who won. Was it me? And was it big or small or big or huge? And of course, we want the patient to get to huge to have a total victory. And if the patient gets stunned or overwhelmed in this role play, you can always just do a role reversal and invite the patient to be that over the top perfectionistic person. And in fact, that can be super useful because the patient can oftentimes realize when they're in the role of being the perfectionistic critical other that it's absurd, right? That no one would actually be that mean or over the top. So a lot of learning can happen regardless of which role the patient is going to be playing. So should we do our role play, David?
Yeah, and I have to say that now I'm playing a role in a movie, and I'm the evil ogre. So please remember that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do to teach a technique, and I'm not trying to be my natural self here. So give me a little slack, because I'm going to look like a mean son of a bitch.
But that's, David, what we have to do as therapists too. And we explain to our patients, this is not me in the role play. Like, I am being this perfectionistic, critical other that you imagine in your mind, right? Would be kind of beating you up.
And so you can play the role of Jill. We'll just assume that Jill is a therapist who's less than perfect. But hey, Jill, could I talk to you for a minute?
Yeah, sure, David.
You know how you were doing this workshop on how people will really love you and accept you if you're flawed, or that you don't have to be perfect. You remember you were doing that kind of BS workshop with Burns?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've heard through the grapevine that you have a couple of patients right now who you haven't been able to help. And I don't think it's true that everyone's gonna love you if you're screwed up like that. Like I judge you, Jill, because of those 2 patients you're stuck with. I used to think you were something terrific, but now I see that I was all wrong about you.
Yeah, well, David, no, you're right. I do have 2 patients that I'm stuck with right now. And actually, I've been getting some consultation from some amazing colleagues and learning to get unstuck. I've been feeling excited about the fact that there's a lot of amazing learning here. It's boring when you're good at everything and don't have anything to learn. So what is it about me struggling with some patients here and there that's really bothering you?
Well, I heard you were some tremendous therapist at the Feeling Good Institute and virtually always successful with everyone. I just thought that that's the way you were, and now I see that you're very flawed.
Yeah, totally. Part of the human race. I win some and I lose some, and I'm working hard to keep growing. So you don't really like flawed people. You just like to hang out with only people who are super perfect. I do know that you're an amazing therapist and teacher and trainer, and I sure imagine you have lots of things to teach. I'd love to learn from you, but is it true that you look down on all your students when you hear that they sometimes struggle a bit with their patients?
Yes, I look down on all of them, including you. You're right at the top of the list. I judge you.
I could keep going.
Okay. So anyway, who won? Who looked like the ass?
Right. I think I won with my humility and my interest in learning and growing. And I think the more that I questioned your belief system, the more you seemed like an ass.
Yeah. And it's kind of a humorous technique, but it has a serious purpose, and it's to reveal to the patient something that they could never get out of real life because it'll never happen in real life. but that even if there was some judgmental person who was going to love them less or respect them less because they were flawed or imperfect, that's not your problem. That's the problem of the person who's doing the judging. And it can help the patient grasp this on the gut level. And this is incredibly helpful for many patients, especially patients with social anxiety and patients who have an intense fear of disapproval or criticism or judgment from other people.
And it can look brutal, but at the same time, it's actually really a fun method. And if the patient can get to that place of realizing just how over the top and ridiculous it would be for someone to be so judgmental, for them to not be perfect, it can be really illuminating and, again, fun. And like I said, the therapist can really bring that to life, whatever their role in, right? Because the role of David being so over the top, I think, highlights just how ridiculous this belief system is. But if we role reversed and David just modeled as the therapist, like a great way of responding to the critic, that would also be helpful to the patient. And you kind of keep role reversing until you get to that enlightenment where this just seems absurd and where making mistakes seems very reasonable and a positive experience. So David, we're going to move on. We have a couple more methods to cover, and then we've got some questions and some more material to share with you guys. So we've shared externalization of voices and then the feared fantasy. And then there's another method that's very often helpful for people who are really hard on themselves and feel ashamed of their flaws. And that's called self-disclosure. So the idea with self-disclosure is that oftentimes when we think we need to be perfect, we're kind of hide the ways in which we're not perfect, in which we're failing. And we think we need to keep projecting this perfect essence out into the world. And the more that we hide, the more anxious we feel. Others might see my imperfections and really look down on me and judge me. And so the problem, we realize, is not having flaws. Like David said, the problem is not being less than perfect, but the shame that I feel about my flaws. And at the same time, shame really can't exist without the secrecy, right? If I keep hiding my flaws, I'll keep feeling ashamed of them. But the opposite is true. If I were to share with people in a humble and caring and maybe even compassionate way a little bit about my flaws or my feelings of inadequacy, I quite oftentimes will feel better. And also, one way of thinking about this is, who would you rather be friends with? Someone who projects perfection all the time, or someone who's willing to be open and humble and share some of their flaws? And so I'll just, by way of, I'll just share an example of my own personal example with you, a way to show how you could use self-disclosure. And there's so many stories we have of patients using self-disclosure. But I just remember when my kids were really young. They're pretty old now, but when they were young, and I had one in kindergarten, so about 5 years old, and a 2-year-old at home, and working, et cetera, and getting my kids to school in the morning was quite an ordeal. Getting everybody up and ready and out the door. And, you drop them off at kindergarten, and moms or dads could, in drop off, say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And everyone says, "Oh, great," and moves on with their day. Well, I made it a point when people would say, "How are you doing?" especially when I had a tough morning getting out the door, of saying, like, "I've been better, actually. It was a lot of work this morning. I mean, Alex was throwing a bit of a temper tantrum, and I don't think I handled it well. And it was all I could do to get my kids out the door this morning. But it's glad this part of my day is over, and now I'm heading to work," or something just really humble and open and flawed and vulnerable. And what I found, on the days where I just said, "Oh, great," and walked on my way, I had no connection and I felt crappy about myself. And on the days where I would be open and talk about my struggles and just I hadn't handled that very well, was when I felt really close and connected to people. And when people would respond saying, "Oh my God, You're telling me this morning, this happened and that happened. And I just felt like I built so much closeness and community by just being open and vulnerable. And so we can encourage our patients to do that and model it for them and role play it with them and then give it to them for homework, so that they can turn their feelings of shame into actual opportunities for connection. And David, you want to share with people a little bit about the environmental
Sure. Yeah. And again, we're just hitting you with the tip of the iceberg, because we have dozens and dozens of techniques to help people who are struggling with self-defeating beliefs like perfectionism or any of the others. And we're just giving you a feel for it, because what each person finds enlightenment by a different route. And that's what we're really trying to bring people to, enlightenment as much as recovery. And the experimental technique was one that would happen to be very helpful to a man that I worked with early in my career. He came to me because he was unhappy, and he showed me his CV at the first session, and he was only about maybe 5 or 8 years older than I was, but he handed me his CV, and it was about 50 pages long, with all kinds of publications and keynote addresses all over the world. And he was just this extraordinarily accomplished physician. And I'll just disguise his identity, and as I always do when I tell a story, but he told me that he was the head of 2 departments of medicine, 2 different medical divisions at the Yale Medical School, but he said that he wasn't ever really satisfied with his accomplishments. And he said, it's like I'm always out hiking, and I say, oh my God, I've got to go to the top of that highest mountain. And then I got at the top, and I look out at the distance, and instead of feeling an accomplishment, I see an even higher peak. And I say, oh my God, I've got to keep hiking. And nothing is really rewarding to me. And that was the thing that he wanted help with. And one of his beliefs was nothing is worth doing unless I do it perfectly. And of course, that had paid off for him, because he was an extremely famous and accomplished medical professional. But the one thing interesting was the pleasure predicting sheet. I had him write this at the top, and I modified it a little. I called it the pleasure perfection balance sheet. And I wrote his belief at the top: nothing is worth doing unless I do it perfectly. And then I said, Bill, why don't you just schedule a bunch of activities in the next week that you could do for pleasure, learning, personal growth, or whatever, and predict how satisfying each activity will be. Write down afterwards how satisfying it turned out to be on a 0 to 100. And then also write how perfectly you did it. That way, on a 0 to 100, we can see if there's a connection between perfection and satisfaction in your work. And you can do things you're used to doing as well as some things that you're not used to doing. And so 2 things he brought in the next week. He was give welcoming lecture to the new medical school class. It was one thing, and he predicted 90% because he always got extended standing ovations because he was such a charismatic public speaker. And then the other thing was to fix a broken pipe in the toilet, because he'd never done anything like that, and the toilet broke at home, and he decided to fix it. And then his actual satisfaction from the welcoming lecture, if we can go to the next slide, was he said it was only 5% satisfying, and his perfection rating was 75%, and he had the note, I only got a 30-second standing ovation. And I said, my God, man, you got a 30-second standing ovation, and you only had a 5% satisfaction. And he said, well, you see, Dr. Burns, I give lectures all around the world all the time, and I always get standing ovations. And so I time them and keep records. And last year, the students stood and cheered for 45 seconds, And this year they only cheered for 30 seconds. And I thought, my God, I'm over the hill. And then the second thing was even more interesting, fixing the broken pipe in the toilet. We'd have to go to the next slide. Yeah, he said it was 100% satisfying, but the perfection was 5%. Because he says a plumber could have fixed it in 5 minutes, but it took me nearly 10 hours. He had to keep going to the hardware store and buying wrenches and asking for instructions. And it took him until late at night to fix that toilet, but then he became euphoric. And I said, well, here now we can see the cause of your problems. You went into the wrong profession, Bill. And it's not too late to change. You could still become a plumber, which he got had a lot of fun with that. But he really loved this pleasure perfection balance sheet, and he showed me other things like playing squash with his son, who was 12 years old, and he said neither of us were not champion squash players, but it was 100%. I just loved it. And then I took my wife for a walk in Philadelphia on an average autumn day. And we were not champion hikers. We were just walking through the woods, and it was 100% rewarding. And he said that blew his mind, that many things that were beautifully rewarding to him weren't when he was doing things perfectly. And he'd been doing all of these things perfectly and had 50 pages of incredible accomplishments that didn't make him feel good at all. And so that was just another way of getting to enlightenment. And I looked him up just recently because I always wondered what happened to him, because I always felt so affectionate toward him after he completed his treatment. Because one thing he told me, he said, although I've published a lot, there's a book I've wanted to write that I've never had the courage to write, because I know a lot of people aren't going to want to hear what I have to say about medical care in the United States. He was an expert on delivery of medical care. And I discovered that he had died a few years back. And they said he died happily with his family, and he was in his 80s. But the obituary was just amazing, and I learned a lot about him that I didn't know, that he was revered as one of the giants of medicine in the era that he lived. He was world famous. But I also discovered something that I didn't know, and I think it happened after he worked with me, that he had consulted with Congress and with the president. And I think he was the one who brought in a lot of the Medicare and the health delivery to people who couldn't afford it, because I think he saw that there's a conflict of interest between medicine and private practice and free enterprise, and that there was too much money and not enough heart in the delivery of medical care. So I felt so proud of him for having done something that he really believed in, and something that made a fantastic impact once he decided he no longer had to be perfect.
Yeah. Such a beautiful story, David. And I'll just highlight that we called this the experimental technique, because this patient designed this kind of pleasure predicting balance sheet to experiment, to test the validity of the belief nothing is worth doing unless I do it perfectly, right? So it's like, try something that you do perfectly and try something. Turns out you did so far from perfectly, and realizing that actually the enjoyment and satisfaction was far greater for this patient when he did something so far from perfect.
Yeah. I've had to learn the same thing myself, and this was my teacher, Obi, my cat. I won't talk about him, but I've written about him in my books, and I've talked about him a lot. And he told me, David, we don't have to be perfect, but when we love each other, it's mind-blowing. And I'll never forget my little Obi, a feral cat we adopted.
And we just have 10 minutes left, and we've got to cover a lot and also answer some questions. So I'll let you do this slide, David, and then I'll
Yeah, sure. So essentially where we've been, and some of you have asked if you'll get the slides and the video, and you will. If you want to access the slides, I'm sure we can provide that. But the first step is you identify a self-defeating belief. The second step, you have to boost motivation. You can't attack self-defeating belief or distorted thoughts without boosting motivation and reducing resistance, which is what we did with Amy. And that at that point, it becomes relatively easy to crush the negative thoughts. And you saw Amy crushing the negative thoughts, not combating them, but blowing them out of the water. That's what we're looking for. That's enlightenment, not just total recovery, but it's a spiritual enlightenment. And then step 4, feel great.
And so I'm going to go to the next pieces and then we'll take your questions. That way we'll know we can do questions till the end. So I really hope that you guys learned something today and, learned some methods and some techniques and have a therapeutic stance as well. And I always love hearing your stories too, David, so much heart. And so if you'd like to learn more, we're going to just share a few things with you briefly, and then we'll take some questions. So if today's training sparked something for you, we'd be really excited if you wanted to join us for the Fast Track to Level 3 certification course. And this is kind of our most efficient and powerful way to help therapists learn TEAM CBT, quickly. And what we shared with you today was just the tip of the iceberg. And in the Fast Track course, we teach these, 50 plus CBT methods and help therapists to master them too. And I'll share with you just one testimonial. We always have people emailing us really awesome things that they learned and what they love about the Fast Track course. And this is just from Stacy, who said it was the kind of training that she wished she'd had in grad school. And so we hear things like that all the time, and it's, super rewarding for us. And there's a lot on this slide, but I will just say that the Fast Track course is packed with lots of goodies. And this slide gives you a little bit of a picture of what's included. So it starts, the next round will start on September 11th, and it's a hybrid course designed for really busy professionals. So it's 16 hours of asynchronous on-demand content. There's a 4-hour live training. David and I are going to work with a participant live, doing a David Burns live, and that's kind of our kickoff event. And then 25 weeks of small group coaching and live practice with awesome trainers and therapists. It also includes free certification, free access to the level 3 certification exam, and David's full therapist toolkit. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you're not happy in the first 30 days, you can always get a refund. And then today we're offering you guys a coupon. So at the very bottom of the page, it has this coupon, Skill Up 50. And yeah, so we'd love for you guys to join us and sort of learn more with us in the Fast Track course. I also want David to have a chance to tell you about the Feeling Great app, which I know is free this summer, which is amazing.
Yeah, we've trained the AI to do just what I would do with you, or what Jill and I did with Amy, just to go through the TEAM steps. And we came up with a new version just recently. The old version was incredibly powerful, and the new version is even 50% more powerful, and people are reporting 60 to 70% reductions in 7 different negative feelings within the first 90 minutes on the app. And we've decided that the best things in life are free, and so it's going to be crazy from a business point of view, but we're just giving the app away for free now. And so we're hoping you'll try it yourself and recommend it to friends and loved ones. It'll be free at least through the summer. So you've got nothing to lose and your life to gain, the world to gain. Also,
Okay.
you can do the next slide. Yep.
Also, we have lots of other free opportunities for people to learn and grow. And I'll do this very quickly so we can get to some questions for the next few minutes. But we have weekly training groups David and I offer on Tuesday nights from 5 to 7 Pacific, where therapists can join for free, kind of unlimited psychotherapy training with us. And the contact info is on this slide. And as well, Wednesday mornings with Rhonda and Kai, a similar kind of free therapist training group. David does the Feeling Good podcast, and there's more than 400 episodes of free podcasts there that you can find on the Feeling Good website. And then David also has the Feeling Great YouTube channel where you can watch David's favorite stories and some trainings and videos by searching Feeling Great YouTube. And if I didn't say it, you can learn more about the Fast Track course on the Feeling Good Institute website. And we can also drop the link to that in the chat box. And so now we'll take some questions.
And we'll give fast answers to these questions so we can get as many questions as we can.
Is it quick one? Somebody's read both Feeling Good and Feeling Good Handbook, but they're looking at reading Feeling Great. What's the difference with the new book, David?
The Feeling Great, the main, I've been fine-tuning cognitive therapy every day for the last 40, 50 years. And so it's way upgraded from Feeling Good on every level, the testing, the empathy, the methods, all that is very high-powered now. But the main thing is the development of the elimination of resistance. That's what's led to the incredible rapid results with TEAM CBT, including our now totally free Feeling Great app.
How is a CBA different than doing positive reframing?
Jill, that's for you.
Sorry, I was just noticing just a question in the chat box. So how is the CBA different from positive reframing? You oftentimes cover many of the same things, but, because the advantages can oftentimes be brought to life as well with the positive reframing. But I would say positive reframing is more paradoxical. The CBA, as we've done it, even though it's a bit paradoxical, it's a bit more straightforward because you're listing the disadvantages as well. Whereas positive reframing is really meant to help the patient feel proud of their symptoms.
Yeah, we've had the cost-benefit analysis since the late 1970s, but the positive reframing and the whole new procedures we use to melt away the eight most common forms of therapeutic resistance. It's much more powerful and much more comprehensive.
Can you describe more about what it means to sit with open hands?
It means to be willing to let go. Once when I was jogging, I said, well, David, what would you do if you had a patient with severe OCD who doesn't want help? And then it popped into my brain, well, I would tell, is there something you do want help with? And just let go of some compulsion to treat somebody just because they have a diagnosis. I'm here to serve people and not to be an expert and tell you what you're supposed to do with your life or how you're supposed to be. The role of the therapist and team is very humble.
Amy said she was hesitant to press the magic button. If someone says yes, how do you proceed? What's the transition from a yes to magic button? I would say
I'm so glad that you said that, and virtually everyone says yes. No one, you've been suffering terribly, and no one wants to suffer terribly. And we don't have a magic button, but I do have some magical techniques, and it's very powerful. And I predict it probably will happen that all your negative feelings will blow them away in today's session if we use these techniques, but I don't think we should use them. At least I'm not convinced. And then the patient gets agitated and said, well, why? If you've got the techniques, I want to use them. I've had 20 years of failed therapy. You must help me. And then I say, well, before we do that, let's take a look at all these negative thoughts and feelings you have, because there may be some beautiful things about you that are hidden in them. And we might want to consider that before we move too fast to make all your negative feelings disappear. And so this is setting up a paradox right away where the patient has to convince the therapist and chase the therapist, rather than the traditional thing where the therapist tries to help and then runs into resistance.
So many other great questions we didn't get to. One last quick one, Jill. Can we do CBT without TEAM CBT? Can we do it effectively?
Well, I can answer that because I was trained in CBT from the very first day of graduate school. And then when I moved to California, I met David, and that was like 17, almost 18 years ago. And I had lots of methods that I could use for patients, but I definitely found that so many patients were resistant or reluctant. And in my opinion, TEAM CBT is like CBT, except it has this whole piece about empathy and connecting with patients, and this whole piece about addressing and reducing resistance. And there's so many awesome role-playing methods to bring CBT to this much more kind of emotional level. So I would say TEAM CBT is like CBT on steroids. So you get to pick your own path.
Thanks, Jill.
Okay. And so we'll say a big thank you to everyone. It's always a total honor to present with you, David. And I so appreciate all these tools that you've developed and how much you bring them to everyone with so much heart and so much creativity. And thank you also to Mike for always being the best collaborator here in these webinars. And thanks to everyone for 2 hours of your time and attention today.
Yeah, I love you, Jill and Mike and Maor, and I love all of you for supporting us, therapists and general public, and for coming today. And if you like these free things for therapists and the general public, let us know, because we've done 2 or 3 of them now, and I hope we can keep offering you programs like this.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, the director of the Feeling Great Therapy Center. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.